Hi, my name is Martin, and welcome to Speakers for the Dead. This is a channel that my brother and I created to talk about some things that we're learning, and it's my personal story on how I decided whether I believed in God or not, or basically when I stopped believing in God. So to understand like the full weight of my story, you really have to go back to the beginning. I was born into a non-denominational Christian family, and I had 7 siblings, and my father was kind of like a pastor, like a part-time pastor. He did some full-time stuff too, and I struggled with faith because as I was growing up, things became less and less easy for me to understand as a Christian in the world. Just the full weight of problems, things happening with friends and whatever in my life, it didn't seem to ring true that the God that I knew of existed. So that happened somewhere around age 16. But to start from some of the initial problems I had, just so that some of you who may be dealing with this can understand, maybe you're dealing with the same things. At around age 11, I had a friend who I went to a Christian school with, and we were watching TV late one night, and his parents had cable television. He had a TV in his bedroom, and we just ended up watching some of the things we're not supposed to watch, some naughty movies that my parents would not have approved of. And that started at age 11, and that just became like a weekly thing. I'd go stay at his house every weekend, and we'd watch that stuff. And when I didn't stay with him, I stayed with another friend, and he used his computer, and we'd watch it there. And then when we weren't doing that, then when I was by myself, I figured out how to watch it myself on the computer or whatever. And this was just an ongoing problem in my life that I'm not proud of, and I feel a little bit weird talking about, but I feel like some of you may need to hear it just to identify with me as a person, that it kind of is just something that we deal with now in this world. So I dealt with that for a really long time, somewhere around it was just an addiction to me. Like it was to me worse than alcohol or drugs or anything I'd ever done. And I was a typical high schooler besides that. I played sports, I drank on occasion, I smoked pot a few times, and it was something that I just dealt with because it was a whole bunch of things, but it basically led me to the point that I wasn't sure God existed, and I was pretty sure he didn't. So around this point in my life, a friend and me and one of my closest friends were, hanging out quite a bit, and we did things like online dating. We were pretty much using that all the time to meet girls in the area, and I wasn't using it really for dating exactly. I was using it for deplorable reasons. Basically, to sleep with girls. I wanted to sleep around. It was stuff that I couldn't get from porn that I desired. And basically, he used the same apps I did. We tried to meet new girls in the area all the time, and he really was a close friend, unlike most, but we both had problems with Christianity, what we grew up in, the Christian church that we went to, our Christian school that we went to. It's not really a sob story that I'm asking for pity on, but I just want you to understand the backstory and why it kind of shook me to the core. I've never figured out how to mourn and unpack that loss that happened to me back when I was younger, and even now I still haven't really figured out how to handle that. But at that point, I come to terms whether I really believed in a soul. I had to really consider that because my friend that I was so close with was like extremely talented, like crazy talented. Somebody that was good at everything he tried, and no matter what we both did, he was better than me at everything. We play different sports, and he was better at those. When we were in a band, I was the drummer, yet he played drums better than me, and it just was like ongoing things like that. So with talent like that, I assumed, if God existed, how could someone so talented never get to use the talent they have? I'm fully convinced that if he were alive today, he would be known worldwide, or at least nationwide, based on his talent of music alone. So that kind of ruined my idea of what God would be. Why would he create someone so talented and not let it happen? So I concluded life must be unfair, and that he accepted drugs and alcohol over his talent just didn't sit well with me as a person. So that's where I stayed for a couple of years, and I did not believe really in God anymore at that point. So after living as a person who accepted the pleasures that the world offers me, for that I mean like dates like Tinder or OkCupid, or live video apps that allowed me to talk with girls online live and video for deplorable reasons, and texting hundreds of girls for years, just not good things. And I even used being a believer, a Christian, as a way for me to talk to some girls, which, it just was something that I knew and I could talk to them about because I understood it. So I got what I wanted, as well as we all do if we're searching for it. But basically, I was doing it all in secret. My family didn't know, my friends didn't know. And I slept around a bit and end up having a child with a girl that I met through one of those dating apps. But I did actually want to date her, but it after things had gotten a little shaky in the pregnancy between us, I kind of just abandoned ship and got scared, and didn't really want to commit to it. Great friends virtually disappeared overnight after I had a kid. Everyone knew I was a liar because I had gotten someone pregnant from a dating app, and no one knew I was using them, and I was pretending to be a good person. I'd been hiding it. I was forced to reconsider how I was living then. At this point, I dropped out of college, and I had spent my full time then working 3 jobs just to be able to take care of my daughter, and this made me feel very empty in life. The situation was one I created, but it was one I couldn't really escape either. And after feeling down and broken, after chasing the money that I needed to do these things, and short-lived interactions, and every alcoholic drink I could try, and I was just kind of worn out with life. Anyway, you get it at this point. I was beat up and couldn't make relationships stick, which I tried doing over and over, but you can understand why it didn't work for me, because, the person I was. Around this point, though, I was accepted for a position at a local Christian business, and my work ethic was good, as it always was, but I couldn't come to terms with being Christian, which is what the business was known for. And customers would come in there sometimes asking questions, and I didn't have the answers that they wanted or needed. An old friend of mine had called me at this point, and he was a friend that I was mutual friends with him and the person who died from drug use. And this was something that we kind of grew up with. We both were in a band with a guy who died from drug use, and we were pretty decent friends through that period. And so we knew each other pretty well. He called to talk to me pretty regularly, and I usually didn't answer because I felt like we had nothing in common anymore. And this time, actually, when he did call, for some reason I did answer. So he said to me that he'd moved to a place in the Middle East. He was going to work there and needed friendship connections. He wanted someone to talk to because over there he didn't know many people. He moved to what was a foreign land to Americans. The culture was really different there, but he had extended family there, and he felt God had given him the opportunity to help children in the area like Mr. Rogers helped kids on TV. I didn't believe the God part of it, but I knew this friend was a good person and had the heart to really follow through with the statement he told me. Recently, I'd been through some big changes in my life, moving and whatnot, and this was also the time my tax return was coming back to me, which was the most amount I'd ever seen financially. And even though things were starting to improve, I really had some pretty lonely nights. My friends weren't really the same as I remember them. They didn't really want to come hang out with me. They wanted me to come hang out with them at bars and whatnot. So I stayed in pretty much any time if I wasn't working. I contemplated life and began to wonder if God actually would care about me if there was one. And my friend, basically, he still called me, and the only friend that I talked to was one I didn't really want to talk to at that time, unfortunately. He had always been the same. He wasn't really much of a drinker or any of that stuff. He didn't get into it. So my best friend, who I couldn't relate to, lived halfway around the world. And I felt like if he thought that I had a soul, I couldn't really argue, because I wasn't at the intellectual standpoint that I thought I maybe would know better than he would. I thought really if there is a soul to save, I should really consider researching and finding that out for myself. So what I did when my tax return was I called my friend as soon as the money showed up in my account, and I said, "I'm coming to Israel. Can I stay with you while I'm there?" The flight I found was just a couple months ahead of time, booked in the least tourist time of the year, May 5th, and it was the cheapest plane ticket anyone had ever seen for a flight to Israel. After landing from the first plane ride in my life, a 16-hour flight from O'Hare to Tel Aviv, my friend set up the plans for me to meet him when I got there. He was so excited that I was visiting, and he let me crash at his place, and it was the most fun or wild or crazy 6 days of my life. As soon as I stepped out the door from Tel Aviv airport, a man grabbed my suitcase and threw it in the back of his van. He opened the door and pointed at the seat. Fearing for my life, I said American Colony Hotel, and he just ignored me, pointed at the seat, and then just waved me on, asking me to hurry up. I just sat down in the van, and maybe it's not the best thing to do, but it worked out for me. He shut the door and basically we started driving right away. I texted my friend that I was in the van, and I told him that we were going to American Colony Hotel, but I wasn't sure the driver understood me, and then my phone died. After about an hour of driving around the hills in Jerusalem, there was like other people that just kept getting in and out of this van, which I didn't understand at the time how a cheroot works, but basically all these people just kept getting in and sitting next to me and would ride for about 5 minutes. None of them spoke any English. They'd just stare me down, and then they'd get out of the vehicle, pay the man, and walk away. So this went on for at least an hour. And finally, we rolled up to the entrance of the hotel, and I got out. The man asked me for some amount of money. I don't remember. I think it was like 6 shekels or something. And I opened my hand. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, and just had all the money in my hand, and he just took the amount he needed and gave me change and drove off. So I walked in to the hotel and found my friend, and then we walked back out. We were trying to get to the bus station a block or two away, and we went straight to the bus station running over there, and the cheroot the van that I was in had taken longer than we expected. So we got to the bus station, got in the bus, and before we even sat down, the guy took off. It was like we were the very last people. Once we got to where my friend lives, we decided to go out to grab something to eat. The thing that we were going to get was shawarma, which is just an amazing dish in that area. So what we were talking about as we were walking there, he was showing me how old the buildings were, and basically he was saying, like, this one's 300 years old, which is about as old as it gets in America. And then he would say this one's 500 years old, and this one's 1,000 years old, so it gets way older there than over here. So there's a lot of history there. Another thing that I saw while I was there was just people walking around with AK-47s, which is something I'm not used to in America either. The oldest buildings there were typically abandoned. So after we got some shawarma, we went home and went back to sleep. And walking home, I can remember seeing bullet holes in all these buildings on the walk home. So the next day, my friend was able to get off work, and lucky happenstance allowed me to have a local Christian pastor who wanted to show me the sites. He begged to show me the sites in Israel and Palestine. He wouldn't even let me pay him for driving, and wouldn't let me pay him for buying me food the whole week I was there. He took me to some of the most important sites that are in the Bible in that area. On the first day, the pastor, I can remember, was taking me to the Dead Sea. Along the drive, we stopped, and he said, "Let's get out here." And he pointed up at a ridge on like a hilly area, and it was pretty steep, not something you'd climb unless you were a rock climber. He pulled out the Bible and he said to me, "Focus on that cliff while I read this passage to you." After he finished reading, he said, "What do you think about this hill?" And I replied, "There seems to be some advantage to it, because if you're on top, you can see in all directions, and no one would be able to sneak up on you. So basically, you have this strategic advantage, military advantage on this hill." And he agreed. And he said, "It really changes the significance of Scripture when you can see it for yourself, doesn't it?" And I also agreed. After that, he said, "Do you see these caves over here?" And I said, "Yeah, I see the caves." And he said, "Those caves are what they're talking about in different passages in the Bible." I can't remember the passage, and I did look for it. I'm sorry, I couldn't find it. But he was describing the cave that they were hiding out in and eating and sleeping during their military situation there. Another day, he asked me, "Have you ever heard of Jericho?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of Jericho. You're not going to tell me there's still something that we can find about Jericho, are you?" And he said, "Yeah, actually, there's still some walls there, and they're like the oldest walls ever found." And it was like I wasn't sure what to believe, so he said he was going to show me. We drove to Jericho, and sure enough, there are walls there, like so old that they had to dig out dozens of feet of dirt above the rubble. And this happened in 1907. The archaeologists removed hundreds of tons of dirt to uncover the stone blocks which once stood as a wall around this city. Then again, it was excavated further in 1950. This time they discovered a tower in the depths of the rubble as the oldest and tallest in the world at the time. It was around 25 feet tall, and all of it was buried under dozens of feet of dirt. And if I show you in the picture, you can see there's like an area you can get out on top, and there's a window there. The archaeologist who led the dig was stating, a woman named Kathleen Kenyon stated, "The destruction was complete. Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire, and every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burnt. Here's how Joshua describes the destruction when the walls fell. Joshua 6:20 through 24. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. This is peculiar because the walls of Jericho were described as falling, but then Joshua wrote the prostitute Rahab's house was built into the city wall, which is where Joshua's spies told her to help keep her and her family. They said that no harm would befall her or the family if they stayed in the house. Her window exited to the outside of the wall, and the spies climbed out with cloth through the window to escape and tell Joshua what they'd found out before they were discovered. Joshua stated the location of Rahab's home in Joshua 2:15. Joshua 2:15. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." There was only one part of the wall still intact when the archaeological digs were performed. The professional opinions of these archaeologists was that the walls fell suddenly and devastatingly, and remarked that it was like an earthquake. But the houses were burned as well. This actually corroborates with the Bible. So at this point I was kind of having some issues because historical fact was shown in the Bible. Maybe I couldn't confirm that it was actually accurate, but I had to look at it and say that it made quite a lot of sense. But at some part of me still was hanging on to, well, once you find rubble, you can make whatever story you want to fit, right? I mean, that's the idea that most secular people have for the Bible. And, I didn't really want to argue that one. So the next day, we went to Capernaum, which the historical significance of Capernaum is actually almost unbelievable. So in Isaiah 9:1, it says, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." In the New Testament, Mark 1:16 specifically, Mark told that Jesus moved to Capernaum, taking up disciples as he walked the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He healed people there in his first day. He walked right into the synagogue and began teaching the locals of the truth of God's words in the Old Testament scriptures, which most of them did not know. They were told what to believe in the past by their spiritual leaders, but Jesus freed them from the heavy-handed laws that were forced on them in the past by men that created more laws than could be followed. The next day he left the city and went town to town, healing people of their afflictions and teaching. In Mark 2:1-2, Mark stated, "A few days later, when Jesus returned to Capernaum, the people heard he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room to fit anymore, not even outside of the building. He preached the word to all of them." Now, let me explain something here, because something I said in the scriptures that I spoke before is actually really significant to understanding the Bible. And most people who watch this won't understand the implications of what I explained before unless I do this section of the video. Before, when I told you that Jesus would come by the way of the sea to live among the Gentiles in the Sea of Galilee, what I'm actually saying is that Jesus was fulfilling a scripture by coming to live in Capernaum. His living there was the completion of a prophecy that Isaiah was given by God 800 years before Jesus was even born. Yeah, I understand some of you might say, yeah, well, who really knows when Isaiah was written? And I get that. I understand. I, in my own accord, cannot tell you the exact year, but I can tell you this. Isaiah was included in one of the most significant discoveries of the last millennium, really. And this just happened in the last century. Now, that discovery I'm talking about is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls were placed in the Qumran caves 100 years or so before Jesus was even born. How can I confirm this? Well, I actually can, but that's for another video because it's very involved. A lot of explanation is required, but stick around and I definitely will explain that to you. So there is a reason actually that the Dead Sea Scrolls was such a significant finding for Christians, and it's beyond some very old books that we already had copies of. In addition, before, when I mentioned briefly that Jesus would honor Galilee by way of the sea, what I'm saying was at the time that Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah, it was 800 years before Jesus was born. There was this path that was used by traders, and it came from Syria through Israel, past the Sea of Galilee, down into Egypt. And this is what they used to traverse because it was a straight shot. And so this path actually didn't have a name when Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah. And before Jesus was born, the Romans had taken over the area of Israel and had done some changes to it. So the landscape there is very craggy, lots of rocks, and not good for horses' hooves. So what the Romans did was they paved this path that went from Syria down to Egypt through Israel. And it was about an 8-foot path, and that's what Romans are known for, is building roads and other structures. So what they did is they paved this road, and since they paved it, they decided to give it a name. And the name they gave it was Vas Maris, which is Latin for by way of the sea. Now, this was done before Jesus had even walked on it. So when I say that Isaiah said Jesus would come to live among the Gentiles by way of the sea in Capernaum, what I'm saying is that Isaiah did not know the name of this road. He probably had no idea what he was writing. So the name of the road was given by the Romans, who had no idea who Jesus or Isaiah was. They didn't even care. They just named it by way of the sea because it went past the Sea of Galilee. Do you understand the significance of that? Like, they named it and fulfilled the prophecy that Isaiah spoke. At this point, I was at an impasse. The places I went to before were really interesting, sure, but it was at this point, at this place, that I had to consider that New Testament and Old Testament actually fit together like I never understood before. Now, the Old Testament and New Testament, to me, looked like two different books. I liked the God of the New Testament, but wasn't sure about the one in the Old Testament. And I know a lot of Christians have that same question. Now, because of these scriptures, I now understand the correlation. But this really had a lot of weight on me, and I had to consider the fact. I asked my friend if I could have some private time, him and the pastor. I walked down to the Sea of Galilee, and I looked out on the sea. I looked left, I looked right. I knelt down and put my hand in the water. This was the very water that Jesus walked on. I realized that I was just standing in the synagogue that Jesus taught in Mark 1. I picked up a stone, and I gave my life to Christ for the first time in 3 years. This is the exact same stone that I took that day. I've never lost it. I wiped my tears. I stood up, turned around, and walked up to my friend, and I said, "Take me to the place where Jesus was baptized." Now, for those who are wondering, I found hundreds of proofs of accuracy in the Bible since then, and that was one of the reasons my brother and I made this channel. And for those curious about my addictions, they are no more. I remember when it hit me that I had actually been addicted to porn for more years than I had not. Now, to me, that seemed impossible for me to overcome, but sure enough, it isn't. Jesus saves. Jesus cares about you, and if you enter him into your life, you will overcome these problems. Know that we will not judge you as a channel for these things that you have problems with, because I was one of the worst, and I can explain that it is possible to overcome. We don't intend this channel to be about judging each other or slapping each other in the face or anything for the problems that we have. So, if this video has helped you in some way, I would ask that you please share it with somebody that could use it. Maybe somebody with the same problems I have, or same problems with not understanding the Bible that I had. If you found any value in this video as well, please keep up to date with our videos as we update this channel. I would like to keep continuing to create more scripture-based content. Even if you don't agree with us, we believe you are loved by God and want to share that with you too. We hope you feel the love for you in our work, and keep the discussion going in the comments until we come back. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't until actually last week that I realized the bus station I walked past in the very beginning of my story in Israel, it was literally across from where Jesus was crucified and buried. Now what this tells me is that Jesus was always there for me. I only didn't realize it until the end. Thank you guys so much for watching this video.